My name is Glenn Ligon. I'm an artist, and right now I'm sitting in Christine Sun Kim's exhibition, All Day, All Night. I've had a long history with the Whitney Museum. I was in the 1991 and 93 Whitney biennials. I was in the Blackmail Show, curated by Thelma Golden in 1994. And in 2011, the Whitney did a retrospective of my work titled Glenn Ligon, America. So when I had my retrospective at the Whitney in 2011, Christine Sun Kim was an educator here and did an ASL tour of my exhibition.
Glenn Ligon is a New York artist who has had a close relationship with the Whitney Museum since 1985. This exhibition is his first mid-career retrospective.
So all these many years later, when she's having a mid-career survey, Christine asked me if I would return the favor and do an exhibition tour. It's amazing that she asked me to do this video tour, her having done a video tour of my show many years ago. It is a full circle moment. When I first saw Christine's show here at the Whitney, I was amazed that it was a show of text and images, but in a very different way that my work uses text and images. I think Christine and I are both interested in language, though approaching it in very different ways. When I use text, it is usually about its disappearance. So that is, I take a single sentence, mostly from authors such as Zora Neale Hurston, Ralph Ellison, James Baldwin, Jean Genet, Gertrude Stein. I take a single sentence and repeat it over and over again in paint, and through the act of repetition, that text breaks down, becomes abstract. And Christine does the opposite. She uses a lot of repetition in her work. She uses pie charts, she uses musical notes, but it's all about clarity. She's very clear in the work and very clear in her intent in the work of communicating, of making things explicit for the viewer. When I use language, it's about the smudging and smearing of the letters of the text and their turn toward abstraction. Christine also has smudges and smears in her drawings too, but it's about process. It's about showing her hand. In the drawing, she's very, very careful to make difficult, complicated material clear for the viewer. But then she also uses repetition in an interesting way, such as the drawing Trauma, Laugh Out Loud, where she repeats the word trauma over and over again and makes a circle out of it. So it's sort of the sense of, through the repetition of that word, that trauma is ongoing. It's not something that sort of goes away, that you're constantly dealing with it. And so I think the ongoingness in her practice, the use of repetition, is really interesting because it signals to the viewer that these issues that she's dealing with don't have an end, and that the work, the act of making artwork, is about working through them. I was really struck by these drawings, Degrees of Deaf Rage, because I think they're the first work of Christine's that I saw, and I thought they were incredibly brave. Rage is not a subject that you often see in museums and galleries, though, of course, it is a subject that we all have to deal with. James Baldwin said, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time." And I thought there was an interesting parallel between the Black experience in the United States and Christine's experience in the United States. But it's one thing to have rageful thoughts, to be enraged by situations, and another thing to put those into artworks. And I think in some ways they were a breakthrough for her, because she realized, rather than downplaying her experience as a deaf person, she actually dove into it and made it the subject matter of her work, and made everything about it the subject matter of her work, including the rage she feels. But what's also interesting is that the drawings are pretty funny. And that sort of sense of outrage rage, and humor, I think, has long been a strategy that African Americans have used. So I was drawn to these works in charcoal for that reason as well. I want to talk about one specific drawing in the series, and that drawing is Degrees of Deaf Rage in Everyday Situations. And she has in the drawing angles that indicate her degree of rage. And these are in response to situations like no interpreters at a meeting, or years of dealing with family and relatives who do not know sign language, or people who act like we don't exist. And so there are everyday situations that deaf people experience in the course of their day, but also what's interesting about it is to see them in a museum setting. They really sort of challenge the viewer. They're not making an argument for acceptance. They're making an argument for acceptance of rage, which I think is a very important thing to be displayed in the space of a museum, where all sorts of emotions, all sorts of ideas should be expressed. But often, even as artists, we censor ourselves. We think we're being too much when we're actually doing important work by bringing the fullness of ourselves into these spaces. Speaking of rage, one piece that I did that dealt directly with the idea of rage was a piece called The Condition Report on Black Rage. There was a book written in the 60s by two Black psychiatrists that were detailing the effects of anger, of rage on Black people in American society. The cover of that book, called Black Rage, had an image of an angry Black man on it. And when I did the piece in 2015, I was interested in thinking about what the state of Black rage was now. And so I asked someone to do a condition report using an image of the cover of the book and just detailing the way that the cover of the book itself has faded, chipped, been banged up over the years as a way of thinking about how our notions about rage have changed over time, how we represent it has changed over time, and what value the notion of rage has. So looking at Christine's drawings now, which are on the wall to the left of me, I'm reading the titles: Degrees of Deaf Rage While Traveling, Degrees of Deaf Rage Within Educational Settings, Degrees of Deaf Rage Concerning Interpreters. And there's one drawing where she talks about her experience with institutions, art institutions in particular, that I found particularly funny because we've all, as artists, had our battles with art institutions, but her battles are particular, and she details them beautifully in that drawing. I was really interested in Christine's piece, Cues on Point. In 2020, Christine was invited to be a sign language interpreter for the Star Spangled Banner and America the Beautiful at the Super Bowl. And she had an interpreter with her, giving her shorthand cues so that she could sign the song in the same pacing that the singers were singing it. Ironically, in the TV coverage, the cameras kept cutting away from Christine as she was signing. So if you were hoping to see Christine sign the entire song, that never actually happened. And so even though she was invited to this important event, she's in a sense marginalized. And so Christine did this piece called Cues on Point, where she focuses on her interpreter who's giving her cues as she was signing the song. And the text that is scrolling on top of the interpreter is her shorthands on how to sign. And what's beautiful about it is that it's a kind of deconstruction of these two songs. We know the words of them. You hear the singer, Demi Lovato and Yolanda Adams, singing in the background of the video. So you hear the words of the song, but they're deconstructed. And I think that is a very interesting political gesture, because these songs are about national unity. These are the songs that are supposed to signal our Americanness. But they were written at moments when, like now, where not all citizens have rights. Not everyone gets to participate in America. So in some sense, the deconstructing of these songs and that appears in this video, I think speaks to our moment about the need to remake and make again these national anthems, these signs of patriotism, to be more inclusive. I mostly work with text and started working with neon about 15 years ago. And one of the first pieces I did was a neon that used the word America. Because like the Star Spangled Banner or America the Beautiful, we think we know what America means, but actually America is a very contested word, a very contested idea. I think American history has been an ongoing subject matter for my work. I've used enslaved narratives and runaway slave posters as a way of exploring American identity. I've used the word America in many neon works, turning it around, flipping it upside down as a way of thinking about that word and how we, from generation to generation, remake our idea of America. In the lobby of the Whitney Museum for many, many years is a piece of mine called Figure.
Here, the word America looks like it has been flipped backwards. Yet actually, each individual letter has been turned. Ironically, the letters A, M, I, and A look the same either way. Yet, the rotation of the letters E, R, and C throw the viewer off and cause confusion. This suggests the fragility of America.
One piece I wanted to talk about is the piece Attention by Thomas Mader and Christine. It is two appendages that are blown by a very loud industrial fan, and one points and one waves. And they're both ways that users of ASL ask people to pay attention to something, to point at something or to wave. But these appendages are pointing and waving at a large rock that's in the middle of the room that seemingly has been worn down from this movement of hands across its surface. So there's a kind of absurdity in it because balloon hands don't wear down rocks. But what I like about the piece is that I find this strain in a lot of Christine's work, the sense that things don't end, that they go on and on and on. You know, you're constantly waving at someone to get their attention. And it's Sisyphus-like, rubbing a rock till it wears down. Well, that's an endless task, you know, especially with a balloon hand. So there's a kind of absurdity in the piece, but also this sort of sense of frustration, of exhaustion. When these balloon hands deflate, they're quite deflated. And so they become almost human-like in a way in their movements. About the show in general, you know, as an African-American artist, often I think people expect my work to teach them about what it means to be African-American. And I think Christine must have the same demands on her work. Teach me about what it means to be deaf. And her work resists that in so many ways, in that she, in the multiple ways that she explores deafness with a capital D, as a culture, you know, as a way of living, as a way of being in the world, I think she's signaling to the viewer that we're all struggling with what it means to be in the bodies that we're in. How do we communicate? How do we talk about important things in the space of our work, in the space of art, in the space of museums? And I think her work in general is a really pointed, moving, funny overview of all the kinds of political, social, emotional issues that she's had to deal with personally, as a deaf person in this society, but what deaf people have had to deal with in general in this culture that often makes no effort to be in dialogue. And I think it's very moving for me to see the show in that sense, because I think that's what my work is about too. So thank you, Christine. I'm Glenn Ligon. Thank you for watching.